If you had the choice to vaccinate your children from diseases, would you? One high school student from Ohio went before a Senate hearing yesterday to explain how misinformation online caused his parents to opt out. At 18, he got vaccinated on his own. In Medical Watch, Meg Ferris looks at where Louisiana parents stand when it comes to childhood vaccinations.
For certain individuals and organizations that spread this misinformation, they instill fear into the public for their own gain selfishly, and do so knowing that their information is incorrect.
Ethan Lindenberger testified to senators alongside medical experts on the need to get accurate scientific information to parents about the safety of childhood vaccines. Pediatrician Dr. Mike Wasserman says he's aware of inaccurate information floating around.
I'm seeing a somewhat consistent rate of people not wanting to have their children immunized, and it just frankly puzzles me.
Louisiana is one of 17 states that allows parents to opt out of getting their children vaccines. The reasons could be medically related or not medically related at all. Parents can just write down their decision on a form and file it with the school or daycare. 1.1% of children have been exempted by their parents. That means 662 children who are not vaccinated. Dr. Wasserman says measles, mumps, and rubella can kill, cause brain problems, and sterility. He says the science is clear about the safety of vaccines.
Autism is not caused by vaccines. There's certainly no evidence of that.
He says even the Autism Speaks organization, made up of parents, agrees. We reached out to the group Louisiana Parents for Vaccine Rights, who sent us a statement saying parents should have the right to opt out of vaccines. The statement also mentioned aluminum found in the brains of deceased children who were autistic. Dr. Wasserman disagrees.
The immunizations that we use now are all single dose. There's no mercury, there's no preservative, there's nothing in it. And the preservatives were only used in the multi-dose vials. Those have long been discarded.
Meg Ferris, Eyewitness News, Medical Watch.
Some studies suggest that children with autism may have more rapidly growing brains and bodies in the womb as early as the beginning of the second trimester.